It was supposed to be simple. Michael Harrington had imagined the moment a dozen times in his head during those 3 long nights in the hospital. He would walk into his house a day earlier than expected, surprise Claire, maybe catch her sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, or humming in the kitchen while making her evening tea. He imagined her startled smile, the way she'd throw her arms around him and say she had missed him. But life doesn't follow scripts. Instead, it gave him silence. A silence so sharp it nearly sliced him open again. "Congratulations, Mr. Harrington," the nurse had said with that too-bright smile when she handed him the discharge papers. "The doctor says your recovery is ahead of schedule." Michael nodded, though the ache in his chest said otherwise. His body was still sore from the cardiac procedure. He was only 52, but the hospital bed, the fluorescent lights, the endless hum of machines had made him feel 20 years older. What made it worse wasn't the physical pain. It was the fact that Claire hadn't been there. Not once. She'd sent a single text the second night. "Hospitals make me anxious. I'll come by when you're home. Love you." The words felt mechanical, cold. He had stared at that message for an hour, wondering when his wife's love had started sounding like an excuse. The cab ride from Dallas back to their home in Plano was quiet. Michael leaned his head against the window and watched the city blur by. Neon signs, traffic lights, people living their lives while he sat in silence. He thought about the kitchen floor in the morning light, about the scent of Claire's favorite lavender perfume that lingered on the throw pillows, about the bed they shared. Maybe she'd be happy to see him early. Maybe she'd even cry. But as soon as the cab turned into his street, Michael felt something in his chest, not the scar from surgery, but something deeper. Claire's car was already in the driveway, but it wasn't parked neatly. It was crooked, halfway across the bricks, like she'd rushed in without caring. Claire never rushed. She prided herself on appearances. He stared at the car a second too long. The cab driver cleared his throat. "We're here." Michael paid, stepped out with his overnight bag, and walked to the door. His key slid into the lock, except it didn't fit. He froze, it caught halfway, grinding instead of turning. The same key he had used for 14 years. He tried again, slower this time. Nothing. Michael's pulse quickened, though his face remained expressionless. He knocked lightly, then pushed the door with his shoulder. To his surprise, it swung open. Inside, the house was dark. No lights downstairs. No television, no music, no food cooking in the kitchen. Just silence. Except for the faint, pulsing glow of light coming from upstairs. Michael's instincts, sharpened from his years in the military, told him to stay quiet. Don't call out. Don't announce your presence. Step by step, he climbed the stairs. Each creak of the wood beneath his feet echoed louder than it should have. His breathing grew shallow. The bedroom door was cracked open. The glow of a lamp spilled into the hallway, warm but distorted. Michael pushed the door just enough to see. And there it was. Claire. With another man. They were tangled together in the bed he had carried into the house with his own hands. The bed she had once teased was too firm, until they both got used to it. Her laugh, soft, breathless, intimate, stabbed into him like a knife. The sheets were messy. His pillow was thrown to the floor. The nightstand still held their wedding photo, tilted at an odd angle, as if the picture itself were ashamed of what it saw. Michael didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't slam the door or demand explanations. The world went eerily quiet inside his head, like the hush before a storm. They hadn't even noticed him. 10 seconds passed. Maybe more. Time bent and folded on itself. Michael stepped back, slowly, carefully. His movements were deliberate, like a soldier retreating from a minefield. He walked down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door. The cab was still idling. The driver looked up. "Everything okay?" Michael's voice was calm, steady. "Downtown. And that was it. No goodbye. No fight. No dramatic exit. Just silence." As the cab pulled away from the house he had called home, Michael didn't look back. He closed his eyes, letting the silence surround him. Not the silence of peace, but of betrayal so sharp it threatened to hollow him out. This wasn't grief. Not yet. This was the moment before the storm. The pain from surgery was nothing compared to the burn now building inside him. There was no fury, no trembling rage, just clarity. The woman upstairs wasn't the woman he married. And she wasn't going to walk away untouched. Not this time. Michael Harrington was many things: veteran, business owner, husband. But above all, he was a man who knew patience. He had been underestimated before. And now, as the Dallas skyline came into view through the cab's window, he knew something with perfect certainty. Claire Benton had played the wrong game with the wrong man. And she was about to learn that silence was deadlier than rage. The following morning, Michael Harrington sat in a downtown diner nursing a black coffee. He hadn't slept. His chest still ached from the surgery, but the wound inside him burned hotter. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's laugh, her face tilted toward another man. The waitress came by and refilled his cup. "You look like you've been through it," she said kindly. Michael gave her a small smile. "Something like that." But he didn't elaborate. He never did. Instead, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name, Robert Klein. Robert wasn't just an attorney. He was an old friend, a man who had served in the same unit overseas, long before law school and expensive suits. If anyone could help him, it was Robert. Michael pressed call. "Mike." Robert's voice was groggy, surprised. "You're supposed to be in the hospital. I got out early." Michael's voice was flat. "Need to see you. Today." A pause. Then, "My office. 11 sharp. Don't be late." Robert's office overlooked downtown Dallas, all glass and steel, modern and intimidating. Inside, though, it was filled with warmth. Photos of his kids, military memorabilia, a worn leather couch that looked out of place against the sleek furniture. When Michael walked in, Robert studied him carefully. "You look like hell," Robert said. "Sit down before you collapse." Michael sat. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. "Claire's cheating." Robert leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I figured something was wrong, but I didn't expect you to hit me with that straight out." Michael's eyes were steady. "I caught her last night. With someone. At my house." Robert swore under his breath. "You want to confront her?" "File immediately." No, Michael's calmness was unnerving. "Not yet." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping into that same tone Robert remembered from deployments, the one that meant he had already thought 5 steps ahead. "I want to make sure when she falls hard. No safety net. No second chances." Robert tapped a pen against his notepad. "All right. Let's start with the basics. What's in your name alone?" "Business," Michael said without hesitation. "Harrington Supply. Been running it 15 years. Incorporated before I even met Claire." Robert nodded. "Good. That's safe. What about the house?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Deeds in both names. But I paid off 90% before she ever moved in." "Which means," Robert said thoughtfully. "We can argue equity heavily in your favor. Might even force a sale." Michael stayed silent. Robert studied him again. "Mike, you're not telling me something. You already started preparing, didn't you?" A thin smile ghosted across Michael's face. 6 months ago. She started pulling away. Different perfume, different excuses. I didn't want to believe it. But I prepared anyway. Robert sat forward, interest piqued. Prepared how? Michael reached into his bag and slid over a folder. Inside were documents, copies of account transfers, titles, trust agreements. I moved liquid savings into a veterans trust under my nephew's name. Locked the business accounts with dual authorization. Even shifted the vacation property deed to my sister temporarily. His voice was calm, almost casual. Claire thinks everything is exactly as it was. She doesn't know she's already been cut off. Robert whistled low. You sneaky bastard. You built a firewall before the fire even started. Michael didn't smile. She'll go looking. She'll think she has access. She'll try to drain me. That's when I want her to realize there's nothing left to touch. Robert scribbled notes. We can freeze joint credit cards, file temporary restraining orders on assets, and open divorce proceedings quietly. By the time she even hires her own lawyer, she'll already be playing catch-up. Michael's eyes darkened. Good. Robert hesitated. One thing, Mike. You sure you want to go scorched earth? Most guys your age would settle, walk away with dignity. This is surgical. Michael stared out the window at the Dallas skyline. I gave her everything. 14 years. My money. My loyalty. Even while I was in the hospital, thinking I might not walk out, she was in my bed with another man. He turned back, voice cold. She doesn't get dignity. Robert didn't argue. He knew that tone. He'd heard it on the battlefield. When Michael Harrington made up his mind, there was no undoing it. The first strike came that afternoon. Robert filed motions to freeze their joint accounts. Michael's bank called to confirm authorization. Within 2 hours, Claire's debit card was declined at a boutique in uptown Dallas. Michael imagined the look on her face, the flash of confusion, then irritation. He pictured her calling the bank, demanding answers. He pictured her realizing that the man she thought she'd been outsmarting had already been 10 steps ahead. He didn't answer when she called. He let it ring once, twice, 5 times, then go to voicemail. By the 3rd missed call, Robert's phone buzzed instead. Claire had found his number. Robert smirked. She's panicking already. Michael said nothing, just sipped his coffee. That evening, Michael drove past his own house. He didn't stop, didn't go inside. But he saw Claire through the window, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, Ethan sitting uselessly on the couch beside her. It almost made him laugh. She had thought she'd traded up, a husband weakened by surgery for a younger, charming professor. But professors didn't control deeds. They didn't know how to freeze assets or restructure trusts. She'd made her move on the wrong chessboard. Michael whispered under his breath, so soft no one could hear, "Check." Then he drove away, the city lights reflecting off his windshield. This was only the beginning. Michael Harrington had always been a patient man. In business, in the military, even in his recovery from surgery. He understood that true strength came from waiting for the right moment. Now, sitting in Robert Klein's office with a second stack of signed documents, he felt that moment settling into place. Robert tapped the edge of the papers. Repossession orders filed. By next week, her car's gone. Michael nodded. Claire had begged for that luxury SUV 2 years ago, swearing she'd pay part of it from her freelance design jobs. She never had. Michael had quietly covered every payment. Now the vehicle was under his business's name, which meant reclaiming it would be effortless. Robert leaned back. "You're going nuclear." Michael didn't look up from his coffee. She drove it to meet him. "She can take the bus now." Robert smirked but didn't argue. The fallout began quickly. On Thursday morning, Michael's phone buzzed with a notification from the finance company. Vehicle retrieval scheduled. That afternoon, he drove past the house again. There it was, Claire's precious SUV, parked proudly in the driveway. He didn't stop, didn't get out. He just watched from down the street as the tow truck pulled in, hooked it up, and drove off. Through the curtains, he saw Claire rushing out barefoot, screaming at the driver. Ethan trailed behind her, useless as ever, flapping his arms like he could stop the inevitable. Michael allowed himself the faintest smile. But repossessions were only the start. "Let's talk exposure," Robert said later that week, laying out another plan. "You want this quiet, or you want people to know?" Michael's gaze hardened. "Her parents still think she's perfect. They send Christmas cards calling me the lucky one. I want them to know the truth." Robert arched an eyebrow. "You're planning a family reveal?" Michael slid over a manila envelope. Inside were printed screenshots, texts between Claire and Ethan, taken from a synced laptop Michael had quietly backed up months ago. Messages dripping with arrogance, mocking his health, laughing about his surgery. Robert's jaw tightened. "She wrote this." Michael's voice was flat. Word for word. That weekend, Michael mailed the envelope. No note. No explanation. Just raw evidence. 3 days later, his phone buzzed. Not from Claire, but from her father. "Michael," the older man said, his voice low and heavy, "I don't know what to say. I didn't raise her for this." Michael swallowed. He had once loved Claire's parents like his own. "I thought you should know." Silence stretched for several seconds. Then the old man whispered, "She'll regret this. I promise you, she'll regret this." Michael didn't reply. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, Ethan Ward's carefully polished life began to crack. Robert had contacts at the university, former classmates, fellow veterans turned faculty members. A discreet conversation here, a forwarded screenshot there, and suddenly whispers began spreading across campus. "Professor Ward, isn't he the one dating a married woman? Didn't her husband just have surgery? Some role model." Within a month, the dean's office had called Ethan in. Officially, it was about inappropriate conduct. Unofficially, it was the scandal that now shadowed his lectures, the way students snickered when he walked into a room, the colleagues who avoided sitting with him at lunch. Michael didn't need to lift a finger. The shame was doing the work for him. Claire, meanwhile, was unraveling. With the accounts frozen, she'd maxed out her remaining credit cards. Her boutique shopping trips vanished. The car repossession forced her to borrow Ethan's dented sedan, which she hated. Her parents, once her emotional safety net, now answered her calls with clipped tones and weary sighs. And Michael? He stayed silent. Each ignored call drove her further into panic. Each unanswered text deepened her rage. She even showed up at Robert Klein's office one afternoon, demanding answers. "You can't do this," she shouted across his desk, red-faced, her manicured nails tapping furiously. "Half of everything is mine." Robert stayed calm, like he always did. "Mrs. Harrington, you'll need to take that up in court. But considering the evidence, the trusts, and your extracurricular activities, I'd advise against expecting half." Her face went white. Robert leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You thought Michael was weak. You thought he'd collapse after surgery, that you could walk all over him. But he's been 3 steps ahead from the beginning. You didn't marry a fool, Claire. You married a soldier." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Robert chuckled, looking over at Michael, who had been listening from the adjoining room. "She's going to break before this even hits court." Michael simply adjusted his jacket. "That's the point." By late summer, the cracks had become chasms. Neighbors whispered about the repossessed car. Friends distanced themselves, too uncomfortable with the scandal. Ethan, once so smug, grew restless under the constant gossip at work. Michael heard through the grapevine that Ethan had stopped spending nights at the house. Fewer texts. Less patience. Claire's golden escape plan was starting to crumble, and she knew it. One evening, Michael received a final voicemail from her. Her voice was shaky, desperate. "Michael, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. You've made your point, okay? Please, just call me back." He deleted it without listening to the end. Because Michael knew something Claire didn't. This wasn't about making a point. It was about ending her world, silently, surgically, completely. And the last move was still to come. Michael Harrington believed battles weren't always won with noise. Some were won with silence, precision, and timing. By the time fall crept into Plano, his plan had unfolded so perfectly that even Robert, his sharp-eyed attorney, admitted he'd never seen anything quite like it. "You've gutted them, Michael," Robert said one afternoon, closing a thick file of finalized motions. "Finances frozen. Car gone. Reputation in tatters. I'd say they're finished." Michael shook his head. Not yet. Because for Michael, the war didn't end with repossessions or gossip. It ended when Claire could no longer pretend she held power. It ended when Ethan, the man she'd risked her marriage for, finally saw her as a burden too heavy to carry. That moment came sooner than even Michael expected. One chilly November morning, as he sat in his favorite diner sipping black coffee, a familiar voice carried from the booth behind him. "I can't keep doing this, Claire," Ethan hissed. "You're draining me. Financially, emotionally, everything." Michael froze, but he didn't turn. He recognized Ethan's sharp tone, the one that used to belong to Michael's wife when she got what she wanted. Claire's voice trembled. "You promised me, Ethan. You said we'd build a life together." "Yeah, well, life costs money. And since your husband cut you off, guess who's been footing the bills? Me. And I'm done." Silence. Michael imagined Claire's wide eyes, her perfect mask of control cracking in public. "Don't do this," she whispered. But Ethan wasn't whispering anymore. "You're poison, Claire. You wrecked your marriage, your family, and now you're wrecking me. I should have known better than to get involved with a married woman." Chairs scraped. Footsteps stormed past. Michael didn't need to turn. He knew Ethan had walked out, leaving Claire alone in that booth, surrounded by strangers who'd overheard every word. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself a genuine smile. By December, the collapse was complete. Claire filed desperate countermotions in court, but Robert crushed them with receipts, trust records, and those damning screenshots. The judge was unsympathetic. Claire walked away with almost nothing, just a fraction of what she thought she'd inherit. Her parents, humiliated by her scandal, refused to bail her out. Friends stopped inviting her to gatherings. And Ethan? Word spread that he'd requested a transfer to another university out of state. Alone, disgraced, and financially strangled, Claire had no one left to lean on. Michael never gloated. He never spoke to her directly. His silence was the loudest message of all. But revenge wasn't Michael's final destination. Healing was. With Claire out of his life, he poured his energy into something greater. Using the funds he'd secured in the trusts, he launched a non-profit for veterans recovering from surgeries and long-term illnesses. He named it Second Strength. The launch event was modest, just a rented hall, a few dozen supporters, and local press, but Michael stood at the podium, stronger than he had in years. His chest bore the faint scar of surgery, but his voice was steady. "When life knocks you down, people expect you to stay down," he said. But strength isn't just about standing back up. Sometimes it's about standing back up quietly, with dignity, and letting your actions speak louder than any anger ever could. The audience applauded, and Michael felt something he hadn't in months: peace. One evening, as Christmas lights flickered across the neighborhood, Michael received a letter. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable: Claire's. "Michael, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I threw away. You were always good to me, and I destroyed that. I'll have to live with it." Michael read it once, then folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. He didn't feel anger. He didn't even feel triumph. Just closure. Forgiveness wasn't his responsibility. Her regret was hers to carry. Weeks later, Robert joined him for dinner. "You did it," Robert said, raising a glass. "You won without ever raising your voice." Michael chuckled softly. "I didn't need to. Some people destroy themselves if you just give them the silence to do it." He took a sip, gazing out the window at the quiet Texas night. Life was different now. Harder in some ways, lighter in others. But it was his again, untainted, unbroken, and fully his. And as far as Michael Harrington was concerned, that was the sweetest revenge of all. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.